There comes a moment in every spiritual seeker's journey when they must confront a profound truth. The tools we use to glimpse transcendence are not themselves the path. They are merely doorways, temporary bridges between worlds. Cannabis stands at this threshold, not as salvation, not as sin, but as a mirror reflecting the deepest currents of your psyche back to you with uncompromising clarity. I have walked alongside many souls in their darkest hours and their most illuminated moments. I have witnessed how this plant can both elevate and devastate, depending not on its nature, but on the vessel that receives it. The most powerful revelation is this: cannabis doesn't create anything within you that wasn't already there. It simply amplifies, magnifies, brings into sharp relief what has been hiding in the shadows of your unconscious. When you stand before this mirror, what do you see? Do you recognize the face that stares back at you? Or have you been wearing a mask for so long that your true countenance has become a stranger to you? This is the essential question cannabis poses, not whether it is good for you, but whether you are prepared to see yourself as you truly are, stripped of pretense, of social conditioning, of the carefully constructed persona you present to the world. The ancient traditions understood what modern recreational culture has forgotten. True spiritual work begins with trembling. It begins with the dismantling of illusion, with the earthquake that shakes the foundations of the ego, the discomfort, the anxiety, the paranoia that so many experience with this plant. These are not accidents or unfortunate side effects. They are the sound of artificial structures breaking, of defenses crumbling, of the ego temporarily losing its dominance over consciousness. This dissolution is necessary for rebirth, but dissolution without reconstruction leads only to chaos. The death must be followed by rebirth, the dismantling by rebuilding. And this is precisely where modern cannabis use often fails. In the absence of integration, of community, of ritual container to hold the experience and transform revelation into lasting transformation. I have seen the collective shadow of our relationship with this plant, the way we use it to simulate depth while avoiding the difficult work of actual psychological transformation. The temporary euphoria, the fleeting sense of connection, the momentary dissolution of boundaries, these are not themselves awakening. They are invitations to awakening, fingers pointing toward the moon. But too often we stare at the finger and miss the heavenly glory it indicates. What is the moon toward which cannabis points? It is nothing less than your own wholeness, the integration of conscious and unconscious, the sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche. The plant offers not escape, but return. Return to the parts of yourself you have abandoned, rejected, or never fully developed. It offers reconnection with the wildness, the creativity, the non-linear wisdom that civilization has trained out. Of you, it offers communion with the depths of your own being, where the personal unconscious opens into the vast ocean of the collective unconscious, where your individual journey connects with the archetypal journey of humanity itself. But this communion is not given freely. It must be earned through preparation, through intention, through the cultivation of inner stability strong enough to withstand temporary dissolution. The ancient initiatory traditions understood this essential paradox. You must be solid before you can safely dissolve, rooted before you can safely fly. Without this foundation, cannabis becomes merely another form of fragmentation, another way to distract yourself from the essential task of becoming whole. I challenge you to approach this plant, if you approach it at all, as the ancients did, as a sacrament, a teacher, a mirror of unflinching honesty. Create sacred space, both external and internal. Set clear intention. Prepare your vessel through meditation, through fasting, through prayer, through whatever practice connects you to your depths. And perhaps most importantly, create time and space for integration afterward, for making meaning of what was revealed, for weaving the insights into the fabric of your daily life. Remember that the value of any spiritual experience lies not in its intensity but in its integration, not in how high you fly but in what you bring back to earth, not in temporary transcendence but in permanent transformation of how you live, love, create, and serve. Without this integration, even the most profound cannabis experience remains merely a footnote in your spiritual autobiography rather than a turning point. I have walked the path of depth psychology long enough to know that wholeness doesn't come through escape from our humanity, but through full embodiment of it. Shadow and light, joy and sorrow, connection and solitude, the full spectrum of what it means to be human. Cannabis can help you see the entirety of this spectrum more clearly, but only if you're willing to look without flinching, without judgment, without the ego's constant categorization into good and bad, desirable and undesirable. This plant asks a simple but devastating question. Are you willing to see the truth of who you are? Not who you pretend to be, not who you wish to be, but who you actually are in this moment. And seeing this truth, are you willing to love what you see? Not because it is perfect, but because it is yours, because it is authentic, because it is real. This, ultimately, is the gift cannabis offers when approached with reverence and discernment. Not escape from reality, but deeper engagement with it. Not transcendence of humanity, but fuller embodiment of it. Not spiritual bypassing, but spiritual confrontation with all that you have been avoiding. The plant holds up the mirror. Whether you choose to look and what you do with what you see, that remains forever your choice, your responsibility, your journey toward becoming more fully yourself, more fully human, more fully alive. In my decades of exploring the labyrinthine corridors of the human psyche, I've come to recognize that our most profound transformations often arrive disguised as disruptions. The moments that shake us most deeply are precisely those that offer the greatest potential for growth. Cannabis, when approached with proper understanding, functions as just such a disruption. A temporary dissolution of the boundaries that keep us comfortably numb, safely asleep to the greater possibilities of our existence. The ancient alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night, the confrontation with prima materia, the raw stuff of our unprocessed psychic content. This phase was not considered a failure of the alchemical work, but its necessary beginning. Without this descent, no ascent is possible. Without this confrontation, no transformation can occur. Cannabis often initiates precisely this alchemical phase, bringing us face to face with our unprocessed shadow material. The anxiety, the paranoia, the uncomfortable revelations that so often accompany cannabis experiences. These are not accidents but opportune word count. 4,500 I've always been. Fascinated by how humanity seeks transcendence through various portals. Cannabis is perhaps one of the most misunderstood of these gateways, not because we lack information about it, but because we've lost the symbolic understanding of what it truly represents in our collective unconscious. The plant itself holds no inherent meaning. It is neither good nor evil, neither sacred nor profane. It is, rather, a profound mirror reflecting the contents of your psyche back to you with startling clarity. This is what makes cannabis both valuable and dangerous. It does not create, it reveals. And what it reveals are the contents of your shadow, those aspects of yourself you've hidden away in the dark cellars of your unconscious mind. Many approach this plant as a form of entertainment, a way to pass time or escape the pressures of modern existence. But I must tell you, as someone who has devoted his life to understanding the depths of the human psyche, that this approach fundamentally misunderstands the archetypal power this substance holds. Cannabis is not meant to be consumed casually. It is a tool of profound psychological revelation, and like all powerful tools, it requires respect, preparation, and proper containment. Throughout human history, cannabis has been treated as a sacrament, a bridge between worlds, a means of communicating with the divine. The ancient cultures that worked with this plant understood something that modern recreational users often miss. The plant doesn't offer escape, it offers confrontation. It confronts you with yourself, with your unresolved complexes, with the shadow material you've been avoiding. The anxiety, paranoia, and discomfort that many experience with cannabis isn't a malfunction of the experience. It's precisely the point. The plant is showing you what you need to see, not what you want to see. I've observed in my patients and in my own explorations of consciousness that substances which alter perception act as amplifiers of what already exists within the psyche. If there is chaos within, cannabis will amplify that chaos. If there is order and integration, cannabis will amplify that harmony. The plant doesn't decide where it takes you. Your own psychological structure determines the journey. And this is why preparation, mental, emotional, and spiritual, is essential before entering into relationship with this or any consciousness-altering substance. In the language of analytical psychology, we might say that cannabis temporarily dissolves the boundaries between the conscious and unconscious mind. The ego's carefully constructed defenses become more permeable. Material from the personal and collective unconscious rises more readily into awareness. This can be profoundly healing if approached with intention and containment. It can be destabilizing if approached casually or recreationally. The true value of cannabis lies not in the experience itself, but in how you integrate what is revealed. What patterns did you notice? What fears surfaced? What insights emerged? And most importantly, how will you incorporate these revelations into your waking life? Without this integration, the experience remains merely a temporary alteration of consciousness rather than a meaningful step in the individuation process. I've noticed a disturbing trend in modern spiritual communities, a tendency to mistake sensation for transformation. Feeling something profound is not the same as becoming something greater. The euphoria, the sense of connection, the dissolution of boundaries that cannabis can facilitate, these are signposts pointing toward potential. Growth, not evidence of growth itself. Growth comes through the challenging work of bringing unconscious material into consciousness, confronting the shadow, and integrating the disparate aspects of the self into a more cohesive whole. If you choose to work with cannabis as a tool for psychological exploration, I advise approaching it with the same reverence you would approach any sacred ritual. Create a container for the experience, a physical space free from distractions, a mental space cleared through meditation or contemplative practice, an emotional space of openness and curiosity. Set a clear intention. What are you seeking? Clarity? Healing? Understanding? The more specific your intention, the more focused the experience will be, and perhaps most importantly, create time and space for integration afterward. Journal about your insights. Meditate on what was revealed. Discuss your experience with trusted others who can offer perspective and support. The real work begins after the effects of the plant have worn off. Remember, too, that no external substance can take you further than your own psyche is prepared to go. Cannabis may open doors, but you must walk through them. It may illuminate the path, but you must take the steps. It may reveal the shadow, but you must confront what is revealed. In traditional societies, plant medicines were never used in isolation. They were part of a comprehensive system of spiritual practice, a system that included ritual, community, mentorship, and a shared cosmological framework. The modern individualistic approach to cannabis use lacks these crucial elements of containment and context. This is why so many modern users find themselves adrift in their experiences, unable to make meaning of what they've encountered or integrate it into their lives. The collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of shared human experience and archetypal patterns, is always seeking expression through our individual lives. Cannabis can temporarily thin the veil between personal consciousness and this deeper layer of psychic reality. When this happens, archetypal content may emerge. The wise old man, the great mother, the shadow, the self, these powerful energies need proper understanding and containment. Without this, they can overwhelm the ego and lead to inflation or dissociation. I've often observed that cannabis use tends to amplify whatever psychological state is already present. If you approach the plant from a place of escapism, it will likely deepen your disconnection from reality. If you approach it from a place of seeking, it may well guide you toward what you seek. But remember that seeking itself is an attitude, not a guarantee of finding. The plant responds to your intention, but it also responds to your unacknowledged motivations, your unconscious desires, your hidden fears. The collective shadow of cannabis use in modern society is the avoidance of true spiritual work. Many use the plant as a shortcut to states of consciousness that traditionally required years of disciplined practice to achieve. This creates a kind of spiritual inflation, a false sense of advancement or enlightenment that isn't grounded in the hard work of psychological integration and ethical development. True spirituality isn't about how you feel, it's about how you live. It's about the choices you make when you're not under the influence of any substance. I've known many individuals who have had profound mystical experiences with cannabis, experiences that genuinely transform their understanding of themselves and reality. But I've known many more who use the plant to simulate depth while avoiding the difficult work of actual psychological transformation. The difference lies not in the substance, but in the approach, in the intention, the preparation, the context, and most importantly, the follow-through. If you're drawn to cannabis as a tool for psychological or spiritual exploration, I would advise you to first establish a foundation of regular contemplative practice. Learn to observe your own mind without judgment. Develop the capacity to sit with discomfort without immediately seeking escape. Build a relationship with your dreams and the symbolic language of your unconscious. Create a community of fellow seekers who can offer perspective and support. Only then will you be properly prepared to work with a substance that so powerfully amplifies the contents of consciousness. Remember that the goal is not the experience itself, but what you bring back from it. Can you integrate the insights? Can you embody the understanding? Can you live from a place of greater wholeness and authenticity? These are the true measures of a valuable encounter with any consciousness-altering substance. Cannabis has been used in sacred contexts for thousands of years. The mistake of modern culture is not in using the plant, but in stripping it of its sacred context, in approaching it with casualness rather than reverence, in seeking entertainment rather than enlightenment. The plant hasn't changed. Our relationship to it has, and it is this relationship that determines whether cannabis use leads to growth or stagnation, to integration or fragmentation. In my work with the psyche, I've found that meaningful growth often involves a death and rebirth process, the dissolution of old structures of identity to make way for new, more integrated ways of being. Cannabis can facilitate this process by temporarily loosening the grip of the ego and allowing access to deeper layers of the psyche. But dissolution without reconstruction leads only to chaos. The death must be followed by rebirth, the dismantling, and by rebuilding. This is why traditional cultures that worked with consciousness-altering plants always had elaborate systems for integration, rituals, ceremonies, community sharing, mentorship. They understood that the experience itself was only the beginning, that the real work lay in making meaning of what was revealed and incorporating it into daily life. The synchronistic nature of cannabis experiences, the seemingly meaningful coincidences, the sense of messages specifically meant for you, reflects the activation of what I call the transcendent function. This is the psyche's natural tendency to create bridges between conscious and unconscious content, to seek greater wholeness and integration. But synchronicities are not ends in themselves. They are invitations to deeper understanding, pointers toward what needs attention in your psychological development. Many report enhanced creativity with cannabis use, a loosening of rigid thinking patterns, an ability to make connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. This reflects the plant's capacity to temporarily shift the balance between the logical left hemisphere of the brain and the more intuitive, pattern-recognizing right hemisphere. But creativity without discipline, insight without application, remains merely potential. The challenge is to bring these creative insights back into structured form, to manifest them in the world. The physical effects of cannabis, the relaxation, the altered sensory perception, the changed relationship to time, all have psychological correlates. The body and psyche are not separate systems, but aspects of a unified whole. The relaxation of physical tension often corresponds to a relaxation of psychological defenses. Altered sensory perception reflects a shift in how we filter and interpret information. The changed experience of time points to a temporary stepping outside of the ego's linear, clock-bound consciousness into a more archetypal, mythic relationship to time. Those who use cannabis regularly may notice that the quality of their dreams changes. This isn't coincidental. Both dreams and cannabis-induced states involve an altered relationship between conscious and unconscious processes. Regular cannabis use can suppress REM sleep, where much dreaming occurs, creating a kind of backlog of unconscious material seeking expression. This is why many report intensely vivid dreams when they stop using cannabis after a period of regular use. The psyche is catching up on needed dream work. The archetypal pattern of the hero's journey, departure, initiation, return, provides a useful framework for understanding the potential psychological value of cannabis experiences. The departure corresponds to the alteration of normal consciousness. The initiation involves the encounters with unconscious material, the insights and challenges that arise. But it's the return, the integration of what was learned into everyday life, that completes the journey and creates lasting value. Without this return phase, the hero remains trapped in the special world, unable to bring the boon back to the ordinary world. In working with patients who use cannabis, I've observed that the most psychologically beneficial approach involves clear intention, moderation, mindful awareness during the experience, and dedicated integration practices afterward. Those who approach cannabis as a sacred tool rather than a recreational escape tend to report more meaningful and transformative experiences. This isn't about morality, but about effectiveness, about what actually leads to growth rather than stagnation. The relationship between cannabis and the shadow is particularly significant. The shadow contains not only the aspects of ourselves we reject or deny, but also undeveloped potential, creative energies, and natural instincts that haven't been given proper expression. Cannabis often brings shadow material into awareness. Sometimes gradually, sometimes with unsettling suddenness. This can manifest as anxiety, paranoia, or uncomfortable self-consciousness, but it can also emerge as creative insight, emotional release, or a dropping away of artificial social constraints. How you respond to this shadow material largely determines whether the cannabis experience contributes to psychological growth or merely reinforces existing patterns of avoidance. Can you stay present with discomfort? Can you approach what emerges with curiosity rather than judgment? Can you recognize projections as projections rather than as objective reality? These capacities aren't automatically granted by the plant. They must be developed through practice. The individualization process, the journey toward becoming more fully yourself, involves both differentiation and integration. You must first recognize what makes you unique, distinct from collective norms and expectations. But you must then integrate this uniqueness into a relationship with the collective, finding your particular place within the larger human community. Cannabis can support both aspects of this process. It can help you recognize the ways you've unconsciously conformed to collective expectations, and it can also help you feel the deeper connections that unite you with all of humanity and indeed, with all of life. Many report mystical experiences with cannabis, a sense of unity with all things, a dissolution of the boundaries of the separate self, an encounter with something greater than the individual ego. These experiences reflect activation of what I call the self-archetype, the organizing center of the entire psyche, both conscious and unconscious. Such experiences can be profoundly meaningful, offering a glimpse of the wholeness that is the goal of the individualization process. But they can also lead to spiritual inflation if the ego identifies with the self, mistaking a temporary experience of expanded consciousness for permanent enlightenment. True psychological maturity involves recognizing that we live simultaneously in two worlds: the day world of ego consciousness, with its linear time, logical thinking, and clear boundaries, and the night world of the unconscious, with its timelessness, symbolic thinking, and fluid boundaries. Most modern people are over-adapted to the day world and disconnected from the night world. Cannabis can temporarily bridge these worlds, allowing the wisdom of the night world to inform and enrich the day world. But the goal isn't to live exclusively in either world, it's to develop the capacity to move fluidly between them, to be equally at home in both. The relationship between cannabis and the complex, those emotionally charged clusters of ideas and memories that organize experience and behavior, is worthy of attention. Cannabis often activates complexes, bringing them from the unconscious into awareness. This can be destabilizing if you lack the psychological tools to work with activated complex material. It can be healing if you can maintain enough ego strength to observe the complex without being completely identified with it. Many modern spiritual seekers use cannabis as part of their practice, but I've observed that those who benefit most have already established a foundation of psychological work. They've developed a relationship with their unconscious through dream work, active imagination, or other contemplative practices. They've begun the process of shadow integration. They have some understanding of their dominant complexes and patterns. With this foundation, cannabis can be a valuable ally in the individuation process. Without it, cannabis use more often leads to confusion, inflation, or further entrenchment in neurotic patterns. The synchronistic events that often occur during cannabis experiences, the book that falls open to exactly the page you needed to read, the song that plays with lyrics that speak directly to your situation, the chance encounter that leads to a significant insight, point to the activation of the Annus Mundus, the unified world where psyche and matter are not separate, but aspects of a deeper unity. These experiences can be profoundly meaningful, but their significance lies not in their seemingly magical nature, but in how they guide you toward greater wholeness and integration. One of the most valuable aspects of mindful cannabis use is the way it can help you recognize projection, the unconscious attribution of your own unacknowledged psychological material to people, situations, or objects in the external world. Cannabis often heightens awareness of projection, allowing you to see how your perceptions are shaped by your unconscious expectations, fears, desires, and beliefs. This increased awareness can be uncomfortable, even destabilizing, but it's essential for psychological growth. You cannot integrate what you continue to project. The proper container for working with cannabis or any consciousness-altering substance includes physical, psychological, and social elements. The physical container involves setting, timing, dosage, and bodily preparation. The psychological container involves intention, mindful awareness, and integration practices. The social container involves community, guidance, and shared understanding. Modern cannabis use often lacks one or more of these container elements, leading to experiences that may be temporarily pleasurable but lack lasting psychological value. If you choose to work with cannabis as a tool for psychological exploration, I advise approaching it with the same seriousness you would approach any significant inner work. Prepare properly, set clear intentions, create appropriate containment, pay attention to what emerges, and most importantly, commit to the integration work that follows. Without this commitment, even the most profound cannabis experience remains merely an interesting interlude rather than a meaningful step in your psychological development. Remember that the goal is not to escape your ordinary consciousness, but to expand it, not to transcend your humanity, but to more fully embody it, not to bypass psychological work, but to engage with it more deeply. With this understanding, cannabis can be a valuable ally on the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming more fully yourself, more fully human, more fully alive. There comes a moment in every spiritual seeker's journey when they must confront a profound truth. The tools we use to glimpse transcendence are not themselves the path. They are merely doorways, temporary bridges between worlds. Cannabis stands at this threshold, not as salvation, not as sin, but as a mirror reflecting the deepest currents of your psyche back to you with uncompromising clarity. I have walked alongside many souls in their darkest hours and their most illuminated moments. I have witnessed how this plant can both elevate and devastate, depending not on its nature, but on the vessel that receives it. The most powerful revelation is this: cannabis doesn't create anything within you that wasn't already there. It simply amplifies, magnifies, brings into sharp relief what has been hiding in the shadows of your unconscious. When you stand before this mirror, what do you see? Do you recognize the face that stares back at you? Or have you been wearing a mask for so long that your true countenance has become a stranger to you? This is the essential question cannabis poses. Not whether it is good for you, but whether you are prepared to see yourself as you truly are, stripped of pretense, of social conditioning, of the carefully constructed persona you present to the world. The ancient traditions understood what modern recreational culture has forgotten. True spiritual work begins with trembling. It begins with the dismantling of illusion, with the earthquake that shakes the foundations of the ego, the discomfort, the anxiety, the paranoia that so many experience with this plant. These are not accidents or unfortunate side effects. They are the sound of artificial structures breaking, of defenses crumbling, of the ego temporarily losing its dominance over consciousness. This dissolution is necessary for rebirth, but dissolution without reconstruction leads only to chaos. The death must be followed by rebirth, the dismantling by rebuilding. And this is precisely where modern cannabis use often fails, in the absence of integration, of community, of ritual container to hold the experience and transform revelation into lasting transformation. Have seen the collective shadow of our relationship with this plant, the way we use it to simulate depth while avoiding the difficult work of actual psychological transformation. The temporary euphoria, the fleeting sense of connection, the momentary dissolution of boundaries. These are not themselves awakening. They are invitations to awakening, fingers pointing toward the moon. But too often, we stare at the finger and miss the heavenly glory it indicates. What is the moon toward which cannabis points? It is nothing less than your own wholeness, the integration of conscious and unconscious, the sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche.